Welcome back to the Metal Exchange. Justin and Chris back again, episode 204, as we cover Dynasty's Renatus album from 2014. I refuse to believe that this album is 10 years old because I remember it coming out and just listening to it non-stop. But we'll get to all things Dynasty shortly. Before we do, how are you, my friend?
Very good. I'm just very excited about all the goings on with the podcast. First and foremost, like I mentioned last week, we have a website. We would love for you to check it out at metalexchange.onpodium.co. Like I mentioned last week, we should be having a actual .com name worked out fairly soon, but in the meantime, you can find everything you need to find at that location. But there's a bunch of other stuff too. Some things we'll talk about later. Some things we won't be revealing just yet. But lots of excitement and feeling good. I feel like this. Now that we've crossed the 200 episode threshold, it's kind of cool to have some more cool things coming down the pike. So good stuff coming.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I wish I could kind of spill the beans now. I'm not going to do that, but needless to say, some cool stuff is definitely coming. I want to just plug our Patreon up front. To all those that are members of our Patreon, thank you. We appreciate the support. To those that are either checking out the podcast for the first time or for those that are, have been listening through some of the other channels, consider joining the Patreon. It definitely does help support the show. And obviously, we love what we do, but we also want to know what you want us to cover. So if you are a member of the Patreon, we will obviously take your requests and obviously cover these albums the first Monday of each month. So thank you again to all those that are out there, and give us a like and a follow at the very least so that others can help. It'll help them find the show. Before we talk all things Dynasty, got a couple of things that came out this week that I wanted to mention. The first of which was an album that had come out that was really, really hyped. It's a French black metal band called Belore, Belore. This had been on my radar for some time. Their last album, Artifacts, came out in 2021. Their new album, Eastern Tales, came out last week. I didn't go crazy I thought this album was going to be my album of the year, or at least in contention. I had high expectations, but something about this album I'm still trying to digest. It is a really dense listen. It is less black metal and more like movie score, symphonic, lots and lots going on. Quite frankly, unlike anything I've ever heard. And so I want to post the song this week just so other people can hear it. I think you would actually get a kick out of this just because it's going to have kind of a Danny Elfman vibe to it, or like I said, just big movie score vibe with just a touch of black metal and certainly black metal vocals in spots. But it's really the orchestration that steals the show here. I just need to spend some more time with it because it just was not quite what I was expecting after that first and second listen. So I have to go back to it, but interesting stuff to say the least.
Nice. You've piqued my interest with that description.
Nice. Job well done then. And then the other thing that you'd brought to my attention and something that we had talked about, but Seven Spires, alums of the Metal Exchange podcast, have come out with their new single. It's called Architect of Creation. Ironically, I think this actually strikes or scratches the black metal itch even more than Belore did in many ways. Adrian's harsh vocals are all over this thing. So if you like the heavier side of Seven Spires, look no further than this new single. I thought it was excellent. I'm really looking forward to this album. Did you have a chance to check it out?
Yeah, just a few minutes ago, as a matter of fact. Yeah, I agree with you. It's a lot heavier than the previous single that dropped, and it's really good. This is going to be this will be a disappointment if this album doesn't end up in my top 5 of the year.
Wow, top 5.
Yeah, just based on their trajectory and how I felt about previous albums. So I know it's kind of a high expectations, but I feel like they've earned that. So at least top 10. But I'd be willing to say this has top 5 potential. We'll see, especially considering how I felt about the albums that have come out thus far this year. There wasn't really a ton of like surefire contenders, so it bodes well. I'll just say that.
Nice. I have high expectations as well. I guess I'll take a little time here to just talk about, it's April, so we're a quarter of the way through the year. I'm not saying that there weren't albums that you liked, but by and large, so far, I think this year's weaker than last year. I think that there were just more top tier releases. That's not to say that I haven't enjoyed quite a few albums. I have my list kind of, raring to go, but something about this year is just a little flat. Like there's a lot of good releases. I don't know that I would say there's a ton of very good or great releases. Would you agree with that? I know that you might even have some catching up to do, but here we are as we sit here at the quarter mark. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'm not super behind or as behind as I was at certain points last year for sure, but I would venture to say there was a lot more I was excited about by this time last year. I'll just say that. It's a couple of albums that made my top 10 or 15 from last year had been released by, mid-April. So, I don't know. I don't know if it's, I don't know what it is. I just, I don't really have a surefire number one or I don't know. I have an album that I like more than the ones I've heard, but I doubt that it'll end up being my number one at the end of the year based on what bands with, Seven Spires and Unleash the Archers. And there's just so many, heavy hitters still to come, possibly a new Dream Theater album. So, there's a lot still to come, but so far, and I admittedly I don't think I've been digging as deep as I did last year for my own sanity. So I'm keeping it more to, things that I'm fairly sure that I'll enjoy and being a little less adventurous. Could change, but
I'll say this. I have been digging deep, but what I found myself doing is I've been checking out a lot of albums, but after a song or two, I've been able to really just kind of stop listening to a lot of stuff because I could just tell it was not going to be something that was really worth investing 50 minutes or an hour on. Not to say that I was upset with the 10 minutes or what have you, but I could tell it was just not going to grab me. And then what I would often do is I skip to the middle of the album or the end of the album. I listen to a third track just to kind of verify. But within, 12 or 15 minutes, I could see I was on to the next thing. And this has happened to me time and time and time again this year where I've been looking for new stuff, new bands, and I just haven't been really drawn to it. Now that said, I've mentioned a few bands on the podcast which really just kind of jumped out at me. Veneer, Segeli, that band from Ireland I have mentioned, Eternal Storm. There's been some good stuff, but at the same time, nothing that I would say. A lot of stuff I've just been able to quickly pass on. So that's kind of how I've been able to manage and get through all the stuff just by not giving everything the full hour or multiple listens that it might otherwise deserve.
I'm pretty much right there with you, although I would definitely think that you're probably listening to more than I am. But I'm pretty satisfied with what I've been keeping up with, and that's fine. We carry on. I feel like I might have burned myself out a little bit last year with the amount of stuff that I listened to. I had a 110 album list, I think, by the time it was all said and done, and I really did a lot of cramming towards the end of the year. I'm hoping to not have to do as much of that this time around, but I usually can tell within a listen or two if it's going to be something that I want to go back to, or if it's just going to be something that I just think is okay. I haven't heard anything terrible. It's just nothing's really blown my socks off. I don't think, or at least not much has up to this point. But like I said, there's still a lot left to be released, so we'll see.
Very good, very good. Let's move ahead then, and let's take a trip to Sweden, shall we? Dynasty. The album is Renatus. It came out just over 10 years ago, celebrating its anniversary on March 31st of this year. It's their fourth studio album, and was a complete departure from the first three, as we've come to learn. And even with the bonus track on this, you just hear a stark contrast between the early sound of this band and what they would ultimately become, which this album is, I know I say this a lot, it's a transitional album, but the band would actually stay true to this sound and has been since its release in 2014. However, what's interesting to me is I don't know that I was really listening to the band much before this, but I was all ears when this thing came out in 2014. How did this band get on your radar back then? Do you even recall?
I want to say that when this album came out, you told me to listen to it. I honestly think it was just that simple. I had not heard of them prior to that. Legit, never even heard the name. And when this album came out, I remember you were just like, you might want to check this out. And so I did, and I've been a huge fan of the band pretty much ever since. It was a slam dunk for sure.
Yeah, this is one of those albums, I think, that it doesn't take a lot of effort to get into. I was mentioning some of those bands earlier where I listened to a song or two and then I would just kind of move on. You're pretty much hooked, I think, from the outset on this one. I would say, though, that as much as I've enjoyed their material since this album, and they've released, since after this album, they've released 4 full-length albums since then. I don't know that it's ever lived up to this album. Lots of good material, lots of good songs, but this album, they really was kind of their high watermark in many regards, at least for me. I remember, again, it was about 10 years ago, and I was doing a lot of commuting at that time, running all around for work and whatnot, and this thing was just an absolute staple. I think I listened to this thing nonstop for the better part of 6 or 12 months. I mean, I'd sprinkle in other things, and then I wound up going back to this disc. I didn't have a top, albums of the year at this point. The podcast wasn't even really a thought in my eyes or our eyes at that point. But had I had a song of the year or an album of the year, both would have probably been from this album. Not only the song of the year, but certainly the album of the year. This was a treat to go back and listen to. However, what I will say is my perception of this album is a little bit different now that I've listened to it with the benefit of hindsight, just a little bit, and I'll explain why later. But yeah, I probably did tell you to listen to it because this thing just hit me over the head. It was the perfect length. It's about 45 minutes. It's not overly self-indulgent. It's just good, fun songs that you just kind of want to rock out to, and provides a nice change of pace to some of the prog that I was listening to at the time, or even some of the melodic death metal stuff. Whatever it was, this scratched an itch for me. And just to kind of go over the band a bit, Nils Malin on lead vocals, Rob Magnuson on lead guitars, George Egg on drums, Michael Laver on guitars, and Jonathan Olson on bass. Needless to say, this band is still together in its current inception, and this band hasn't missed a beat, despite, me saying that some of this stuff wasn't really, my favorite material by them, going forward. It's still really good. And this album was really kickstarting the whole thing.
Just to give you an idea of how quickly I think word spread on how good this album was, I added it to my library on April 21st of 2014, which was about a month after the album came out. So clearly you were telling me this just came out and it made an impression on you right away, and you told me I needed to hear it right away. So that just kind of tells you the story right there. I was surprised that I was looking at that. I was like, wow, that is, at least for 10 years ago, I wasn't really as on top of things as I am now. So I was a little surprised that I would have it that quickly, and I have to give you credit for that because I don't know how else I would have heard about this band. And like I mentioned last week, I was convinced that this was their debut album based on the fact that I had never heard of the band before, and I was a a little surprised to find that they actually had 3 albums prior to this.
Yeah, I remember when this came out, and that's really the reason why I kind of suggested it. I had a feeling this would be in your wheelhouse and something that you would gravitate towards immediately. And I think I was right. So let's get into it. As I mentioned, this is a little bit of hard rock, although that's their previous albums were a lot more hard rock. This is a little bit of power metal, a little bit of heavy metal, a little bit of melodic metal in one nice, neat package. And I think that it is really kind of hard to box them into one genre. They're touching a little bit of different things, but damn, does this album have hooks galore. I think that you'd be hard-pressed to find an album like this with as many hooks as this one does.
I was hooked. I just remember like putting this on the first time and being like, hell yeah. And this was like, this is a good bit before like the Frontiers, deluge of bands started coming through the pike that really, I think this music kind of fits that, style where it's just really good, heavy melodic music. And this, I feel like, them and kind of Eclipse for me were like the 2 bands that kind of, scratched that itch for me at that time, like that I had discovered right around that time. And just, I remember really liking both bands pretty equally. And then Eclipse is a band. It wasn't actually terribly long ago that we talked about their Bleed and Scream album, which came out 2 years prior to this at your behest as well. That was only a couple of months ago. And so that album and this album, I always were like my entry points to both bands. And so I always think about these 2 albums a lot. So I'm kind of glad that we talked about them, or talked about one and are now talking about the other. But I think that I want to say I always gave this album the edge over Bleed and Scream. We'll see if that kind of holds up, but I've really enjoyed their albums since then. Since this one, I would really have to do another deep dive into the subsequent albums to really see if I feel that this is their best album or not. Because I've really enjoyed the ones that came after. But I feel like this is easily the one I know the best.
Yeah, same with me, just because I played the shit out of it for as long as I did. But before we start getting into the tracks themselves, when you went back to it this week, did your memory of some of your favorite songs immediately be like, oh yeah, this is why I love the album? Or did you find new stuff that you were like, I didn't necessarily remember this track, but it really knocked your socks off this time around?
No, I think I listened to the album so many times that pretty much it was like as expected. I'm just looking at my play count, and this is like easily just one of those albums that I could tell I went back to and just played and I don't do that a lot, because a lot of times it's like just an album doesn't really pop into your head like, oh, I want to go back and listen to that. But this one was always that, like one of those albums just because there's no lulls. It's just the whole album is fantastic. Every song is great. So it was an easy choice to go back and listen to. They were supposed to play the whole album at Prague Power the first year they were supposed to play. And so I'm sure I listened to it in anticipation of that a bunch of times as well. But there were 2 songs on this album that I always considered my favorite. And after listening to it a bunch more times, I stand by those 2 songs.
I am so curious if they're the same 2 songs that I hold in such high regard.
It'll be interesting to see. I'm curious too.
Yeah, because as I went back to it and I'm listening to this thing, I was saying to myself, my memories of this, at least in terms of the tracks that I love, stayed exactly the same. There was 1 or 2 tracks that resonated with me a little more, 1 or 2 that actually resonated with me a little bit less. But by and large, there was 2 or 3 songs in particular that are just amongst my favorite songs of all time. I just love them. So we'll get there. We will certainly get there. This album kicks off right out of the gate with a banger called Cross the Line. And what's I think enjoyable, at least in part, about this album is that all the songs, with the exception of an album, a song towards the end called Salvation, all these songs are very, very digestible songs in and around the 4-minute mark. You're in, you're out, you're on to the next thing. And Cross the Line is no different. This thing, the keys immediately jump out, and they add such a dynamic layer to this album. I'm not saying I need keyboards in my melodic music. I don't. But when you have it and it's well done like this, it just adds another layer to this kind of music that is really, really cool. To say nothing of the fact that they have a dual guitar attack. It's a really full sound. And in this particular song, the verses are just straight up in-your-face metal. Not the most interesting riff, but the vocals are so good that it almost doesn't matter that the riff is a little pedestrian on this. It is just one of a million catchy choruses on this thing. And all of a sudden, the bridge slows down just a trifle, and then all of a sudden, it comes back with a vengeance towards the end. This is not my favorite track on the album, but I can't think of a better way to kick it off.
Yeah, like the first 15 seconds, you're just like you're hooked. Like it's such an infectious melody right off the bat, and it's just got everything. It's got great riffs. It's got a catchy keyboard melody kind of holding it all together. The drums sound great. Nils's vocals are awesome. Like it's just all of it is great. Awesome way to start. Not my favorite song either, but agreed that it's really like a perfect song to kind of kick things off. And I always thought this was a really good tune. Probably one of the more memorable songs from the album for me, but that might just be because it was the opener.
It's possible. It's possible. Starlight, track number 2. Better, worse, just the same? How does this one kind of rank for you?
Well, this one has a little callback to Silence of the Lambs at the beginning, so that's always fun. A little line, one of the most classic lines from any movie, really. I think it's pretty much on the level. Like my enjoyment of this album is pretty much a plateau with a couple of bumps up for the songs I really like. But I mean, I don't really feel like there's ever a time where the album kind of even like drops down to like average. I think every song is very good to great. Like very good is the worst you're going to get on this, in my opinion. I don't think there's any duds.
I actually like this song even better. It's not my song of the week again, but I think the riffs are actually more enjoyable. I think the low end is actually kind of underrated. I think that it really pops on this. And again, those soaring vocals, especially over the bass lines during some of these verses, absolutely awesome. A top-notch chorus. It's just one of those fun songs that you want to hear live, and goes back to my gripe. Saw them at 70K, just a couple of months ago. They didn't touch this album, and I don't know why, because this style is right in line with their other albums that they've done since then, as I mentioned earlier. Not really sure why they wouldn't at least play something off the album, and Starlight would have been a good choice, The keyboards are a little bit further back in the mix, but again, just add that other layer or that other dynamic to it. And I love the sound of the guitar solo. Not so much the solo itself, but just the clean sound of the guitar solo. Great song, and something that I would just love to sing along to live. And you had mentioned the Prague Power appearance earlier. They would come back and play the festival, but they would not play this album in its entirety. And I just feel like it was a complete missed opportunity, because I would have loved to have heard this whole thing live. I think that it lends itself to the live setting so well. And it seems like that ship has sailed insofar as they don't even touch it now, like I mentioned.
Yeah, they and it was like a very last minute thing. Like literally, I think were they the ones where like a couple of them made it over and a couple of them got detained like at the airport, and like it was literally like the weekend of, because they were selling the shirt. I have the shirt from them.
Really?
supposed to play, I was just like, I'm just going to buy the shirt anyway, even though they're not here. And then I bought the new shirt when they came back. So I actually have 2 Prague Power Dynasty shirts.
Oh, that's so funny. I had no idea. Yeah, it was a real disappointment. But what I've noticed, and this is not a slight against Amaranth in any way, but Nils Malin on these discs sounds so different than he does in Amaranth. And that's not to say that he doesn't do leads in that band. He does lead vocals, at least sharing the duties with Elise and the Growly guy. But what I don't understand is why they don't
Growly.
why they don't let him take the training wheels off and do his thing, because he's so much better in this band than he is in Amaranth. And when he had kind of taken over for Jake in Amaranth, I expected more of the same, just him belting out these vocal lines, and he just sounds more reserved in that band. He could be doing so much more.
Yeah, I don't really know what the thought process is with that. Maybe they just kind of are happy with just him doing Nils Light. But there is. I definitely agree that there's a difference, and we've talked about the Tommy effect with the difference between Seventh Wonder and Camelot. Like, I guess just some bands require different styles, and when you have these singers who are capable of doing more than one style, I guess it's all a matter of taste, I suppose. But I prefer this version of Nils personally. And it should be mentioned that when Dynasty did come back, he performed, I think, wasn't it in the same night with Amaranth and Dynasty? I think they were both on Saturday night that year. So he did double duty, which good for him. I thought he really was fantastic with both bands. That was a lot of fun. That was 2 very fun sets that I remember very fondly.
Yeah, no disagreement here. And it still sounds great. I should just note, even though I wasn't thrilled with the setlist selection, still sounds fantastic live. But we roll on with track number 3 from this album, and it's called Dawn of Your Creation. This is picking up really right where Starlight left off. This little drum fill at the beginning with just a great sounding bass. Not that the bass lines are particularly intricate, but it's just a full sound with the keys on top. Kind of a simple but effective drumming. Awesome riffs on this one. And again, Nils just showing off his range on something like this. I think this song is another earworm, and I love the guitar solo, which actually kind of reminds me of Yngwie Malmsteen just a little bit at the beginning of that guitar solo. And I like how it's kind of layered with the guitars and the keyboard solo all at the back end of this thing. Another very good track.
And it's to me, it's like these kind of keyboard riffs that are kind of like the glue that holds these songs together. And I think those are the hooks I think that you really remember. And this is another one of those songs, probably my favorite of the first 3 tunes. I just think it's such a kick-ass tune. I mean, I'm probably just going to sound like a broken record, for each of these tracks, but I mean, it is what it is. Like this is another really good tune. Again, like a great keyboard melody, I think that kind of holds it all together. But I mean, if for whatever reason, like you're listening to this podcast and you're just not familiar with this album, like we both urge you to stop, pause the podcast, go listen to the album, and then come back and listen to the rest. Because
then you'll understand why we're saying this. Yeah. But if Dawn of Your Creation was the best of the first 3 in many ways, does the Northern End take it to the next level and become the best of the first 4, or is it, just a slight step back for you?
No, it stays kind of pretty much on par with everything else. This one feels a little bit less high energy. It's a more mid tempo kind of song. It has that like really severe kind of keyboard sound at the beginning. Like it's almost like an alarm in a lot of ways. It's an interesting sound, but again, it's just another really crunchy, good, like catchy song, just not as fast paced as the first three songs. I would say.
I love this song. I really thought about making it my song of the week, and I think that at least for my money this week, it was probably my favorite listen of all of them. I definitely agree with you. The pace slows down here, but damn, this thing's a banger. This thing is, it's got, they do certain little tricks here that I love. For example, during the verses, the band actually fades out and it's just the vocals over that like single guitar tone. I love it. It's like a little gimmicky, but for whatever reason, I think it's great. And I think that when the band all of a sudden joins in, it's just magic. And the keys and the riffage, this is really, really cool, with maybe the best bridge on the entire album, how it just picks up steam. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Easily would have been a song of the week for me, and is probably, I'm not going to make it my song of the week. I'm going to go with something else, but I think I enjoyed this more than anything else this week.
Nice. Yeah. I really was like waiting for like a song to pop up and be like, wow, I didn't really remember this song, or like I kind of forgot about this song, and like literally every song I was like, oh yeah, like each one I was like, oh yeah, this is good. Like this is just, I think this is one of those rare instances where an album that you chose I know almost as well as an album that I would have chose. So like it's usually, I think you challenge me like more, and this one was what we call a slam dunk, I guess, or a ground ball, if you will.
Yeah, I wanted to throw you a bone with this one.
But although it's kind of funny, like one is a spectacular move in one sport, and one is kind of boring in the other. So.
well played. We get to Incarnation, track number 5. For my money, Northern End is a very hard track to follow. So with that said, this thing almost starts like a ballad. It's got like an acoustic guitar with the vocals on top, and you kind of think it's going to stay that way, but then the band kicks in with this kind of mid-paced, melody-driven tune because of the keys. A tad slow, like it's not as much of a upbeat song as some of the stuff on the front end of this thing, but it's really, really catchy, especially the part that begins with Our Towers. The like that whole section of the song is really cool, and I guess you'd call it the pre-chorus that leads into the actual chorus. Awesome. What I noticed that you can actually pick out some of the bass lines on this thing, and they're really good. It's some of the more inventive bass lines on this thing, and I think it's a credit to the mix. The album just sounds good, and it's not too surprising, right? It's only a decade old, but it's noticeable, right? It's a notice, and they've had a great mix on every album they've done since this. But what they do on this track that's a little bit different is they actually layer the vocals in spots, which is really cool. I don't know if that makes it difficult to play live, but it's certainly enjoyable when you're listening to it on the album.
This has always been my favorite song on this album, and it is still my favorite song on this album. It might be my favorite Dynazty song ever.
Really?
I absolutely love this song. Always have, always will. Song of the week is easy choice for me. I kind of knew it as soon as you said what album we were listening to. I was, saying like it's going to take something to like pop out of after hearing it for 10 years and all of a sudden deciding that I like it better than this. And that just didn't happen. I think this is just as close to a perfect melodic metal song as there could be. Like it kicks. First of all, I love both the intro and the outro with that acoustic guitar that I think is such a great bookend to a song that kicks so much ass in the middle, but like at the beginning and the end, it's like, oh, it's this is, very unassuming. And it's like, oh shit, here we go. It kicks in that keyboard riff, that kind of, that plays along with the song. I think just, again, like that is what I think really makes this album so great, is those keyboard melodies that just tie the songs together. The songs are already very good, but those keyboards just really tie it together, put it over the top. I thought this is one of the best vocal performances on the album. The guitar solos are fantastic. Like everything you said I just, there's nothing I don't like about this song. I love it. So let's give it a listen. I was legitimately concerned that you were going to choose this as well, and I was going to have to pivot. I had a backup song in case. Actually, I wasn't even sure. I might have just said, all right, we're both choosing this because I don't know if I could.
It's happened.
I don't know if I could cheat on the song, but I did have I do have a second favorite song on the album that we haven't gotten to yet. But yeah, let's give this one a listen, and we'll come back and run amok some more.
The final curtain call, the hour is at hand. We stand in front of the light, so firmly in the sand. The scent of victory invests within our minds. The light from above will descend and shine upon mankind. Our towers are set on a falling. The dawn of a new world is calling. The chain of hatred dissolving our willingness embodied. See the incarnation, creation. Behold our transformation. The final step towards another life free of condemnation. Ascension, redemption. This is the incarnation. We are all related as our souls are incarnated.
Really good choice. I'm a little surprised that you picked it, not because it's not a great song. I just, for some reason, thought you might go in a different direction, but I'm glad you like this song. I can certainly understand why you chose it. And you gave a great segue to the next track. Side B of this album starts with Run Amok. Every time I hear this song, I think of Pat, because it's not my favorite song on the album, but the guy would just say, let's run amok for about a year and a half straight when he would be listening to this. So really funny. Surprisingly heavy. I forgot how heavy this song was. Really great drum fills and some amazing bass lines. And although the verses are outstanding, I actually think the chorus is a little less than as compared to the verses, which is kind of interesting. Usually it's the chorus that grabs you. Not my favorite instrumental section ever, although I like the groove behind it. It's a little repetitive for me. Good song. I don't know that I would call it as good as the first 5 songs that come before it. It's a little bit less than for me and would ultimately get a little bit better on some of these other tracks on the back end, but certainly a good song and not worth skipping.
I agree. I think I like this song a bit more than I remembered for whatever reason. I think the chorus is maybe the weakest part of the song, but the rest of it's really kind of catchy. So I remember this was the year this album came out. I remember this was one of the songs that was playing over the loudspeaker at Prague Power. So that is a random memory I have. That was, and that's a whole playlist that's curated by Glenn, the promoter, which is really cool. And if I ran a music festival, I would have done the exact same thing. You're just going to be listening to my playlists while bands aren't playing. So sorry that Last Train to Clarksville is playing at Prague Power, I guess. But another really good song. It's kind of I feel like in an unenviable position for my taste and my love of the previous song to follow it up, but this is a really solid song to follow it up, and kind of it picks up a little more of the speed after like 2 songs that are kind of mid-tempo in parts. There's parts where they speed up too, but like they're a little bit less in your face than the first 3 tracks, and this kind of goes back to like that more like start to finish onslaught that like those first 3 tracks had. So and the next track I find is not terribly different in that respect either. Yeah,
It's funny. As I went back with the benefit of hindsight, I did know all of these songs really, really well. Unholy Deterrent is the next track, and it's probably very well placed. I couldn't imagine this being further up on the album, but I can also understand that it would have gotten real buried on the back end because it was not terribly dissimilar from the track that, Run Amok that came before it. It's another good tune. I wouldn't call it like the most memorable song on the album. It's quite fast, rather catchy, kind of underrated in many ways, but at the same time, I wouldn't say it's for me, it's not like the Northern End or anything like, that I had mentioned earlier. What I'd be remiss not to mention is that some of the high notes that Nils Molin hits on this thing are out of this world. And I'm not sure how somebody can hit some of these notes. It sounds like it's almost like auto-tune. That's how crazy some of this stuff is. But really, really cool. And it's his ability to hit some of these notes that in many ways I think separates this band from some of the other Frontiers artists or contemporaries, because they are just able to do things that others cannot because of his vocal stylings.
Let's also keep in mind that dude was 25 years old when this album came out. You know, like he's still, he's younger than us. I'll just say that. But I mean, again, like I said, there's nothing less than a very good song on this album, but this is probably my least favorite of the tracks.
On the whole album?
Even though it's still a very good song, I feel like it's the least interesting of all of them. Although I still really like it, and I would never skip anything on this album, quite honestly.
It's interesting because that's how I feel about Sunrise in Hell, the next track. It's the first one where I say, meh. It's not bad, not skippable, happy to listen to it, but it's just not as good as everything else. It's a tad slower, has a nice cadence to it, but it's a little bit flat to me. Some good bass lines, a really full sound once again. It just doesn't have that over-the-top quality that some of these other tracks have, and I think that's why, for me, it's the weakest song on the album. That, and because of my thoughts on the track that follows it, Salvation. But before we get there, talk to me about Sunrise in Hell.
I think I thought I was going to feel the way you just described about this song. I actually liked it more than I remembered. It's something about it. It has more of a kind of like marching kind of cadence to it, or like tempo. But it's like a really fun tune. I thought I would have guessed without, like, if I just looked at the song list before I listened to this album this week, I would have probably guessed this was going to be my least favorite song, but I actually kind of like it quite a bit. Better than I remembered. Just kind of a cool tune, and I think kind of has a little bit of its own flavor compared to some of the other songs that preceded it. So I guess I felt a little bit differently than you did, but I have a feeling we both felt pretty strongly about the next track.
Well, if I had a song of the week in 2014 or a song of the year, it would have been Salvation. And although I think I enjoyed the Northern End a little bit more this go round, this song is still incredible. And as I mentioned, it's the one song on the album that doesn't clock in at around 4 minutes. It's about 7.5 minutes, so we'll call it an epic, at least by way of comparison, with the other stuff on here. There were times back in 2014 where I would play this song and I would immediately skip and play it again and again. I had it on repeat, and that's just not something I do. I'll play albums, but I will never skip tracks to play the song, multiple times in a row. But that's what I was doing with this thing. I loved it. It is no different this time around. It is my song of the week. Let's give it a listen, and then I'll tell you why I chose it, and then I obviously want to hear your thoughts as well. Here's Salvation.
I've crossed all the seven seas. I've watched and I know how it feels to live and learn, to hate and love. It burns your soul. Anytime you fade away, like a flower you will wither and you will decay. And soon you will say, I'm just a fallen man. My end is at hand. Take me when all my suffering bring me peace again. End of the line, this is my final stand. This is my requiem.
I love how this song just kind of starts out with the vocal lines and nothing else. It is beautiful, and you almost think it's going to be a ballad, but damn, this thing picks up and it rocks hard. It is awesome how it just picks up speed throughout. The riffs are awesome. The melody is great. And I thought the chorus was just really powerful and kind of like an impassioned chorus. And then I mentioned a great bridge earlier. This is the other big bridge on the album. It has this whimsical type feel to it, with these drums that just all of a sudden pick up out of nowhere with soaring vocals behind it. Love this song. And even the backing vocals, while not special, I think they lend a lot to this particular track. I'd kill to hear this thing live. Just absolutely kill to hear it. I was hoping they would play it on the 70K. They didn't. One can only hope they do a fans pick the set list thing at some point. But yeah, I love this tune. I trust you do as well.
Absolutely. It's funny. I did a little quick search, and you had, like I had mentioned, you've been making me these playlists since 2010, and this literally was a request that I had made right after we went to Prague Power in 2010. So it would have been my second year back at the festival, and I had kind of, in a lot of ways, I think this was like the seed of this podcast beginning. But I remember saying to you, like, I want you to make me a playlist every month if you can, and just with like what you've been, what's good that's new, what's good that's like old that it just happens to excite you that month or whatever. And so this has been going on since the first playlist you made for me was in October of 2010. So in I don't know if I'm trying to figure out when this would have began. It looks like in 2012 would have been the first year where the January playlist that you were making for me was kind of like your 50 or your favorite albums of that year. Although I don't think that you were ordering them until we started actually doing it for the podcast, because like each January that I'm going through, there's like more and more songs on the playlist. It starts out like 12, and then there's 20, and now there's like in 2013 there was 39 songs. In 2014 it looks like 50. So like it looks like eventually it turned into a 50. But again, I don't think that it was in any particular order. But what I will say is that in 2015, in the 2014 year in review, this song was the last song on a 4-hour playlist that you made. So
I'm consistent, if nothing else. I love the song then. I love it now.
Clearly, you were a fan.
I still am. I think it's just a phenomenal tune. Where does it stand for you in terms of the pecking order of this album?
It's easily my second favorite song on the album, and it's close too. I mean, it's just that good of a song. It's like you said, it's way more epic. It's almost twice as long as Incarnation, but it has such a cool, unique way to kind of start, where it's just Nils and an acoustic guitar, and then I love just the build of his vocals to get like where it's really kind of just, it's not fully a cappella, but it's really just him and like the keyboard chords, and then the guitars kick in and the song just starts to rock, and it's really just this like 7.5 minute awesome track. Never overstays its welcome. It's just an unbelievable song. And so I was really hoping that you would choose this, because those were the two songs I really wanted to play clips from in this episode. So it all worked out. I will say the only thing that I think is a little bit weird is that this wasn't the last song on the album, because being the quality of the song and the length of the song, it kind of seemed like it would have been the perfect candidate to like just cap things off. And I'm not going to count the bonus track as like the album proper, but the last track, A Divine Comedy, while a good song, it's kind of a bit of a come down before the album ends, which I think is a little strange.
I agree, and I always kind of thought it was like a bonus track because it doesn't have the same feel as the rest of the album. That's not to say I didn't enjoy it this week. I actually thought it was better than I remembered it being, because when I kind of went through this album in my head, from yesteryear, if you will, I remember thinking like, oh, the last track is just the one, the one of the weaker links on this thing. I actually liked it quite a bit. I thought that it has this spacey vibe because of the keys, and it's almost like a Star One type of feel to it, which is kind of cool in many ways, but there's something endearing about it. It just has a different feel. My knock on it is that it's just a little repetitive, but the cadence is awesome, and the use of rhyming words is kind of cool too. So I've actually come around on the song. I think it's pretty good, but it does feel a bit misplaced, and I think they could have ended it with Salvation.
Yeah, it's almost as if they wanted to finish things off with something that's that like heavy, fast-paced, crunchy kind of song, much like, most of the rest of the album sounded like. And it's funny because for years I assumed that Bring the Thunder was the last song on this album, and it never made any sense to me because the song just sounds like a totally different band. And then I realized much later that this was just a re-recording of something from their very first album, and that would explain why it didn't really kind of fit the motif of the rest of the album. But I think that fact that a Divine Comedy felt a little bit like a departure from Salvation. I don't think I thought too much of it, but something always felt weird about it to me. And so now that I know that, it's kind of the only taste I've ever really given myself of that old Dynasty sound. But I agree with you. I think A Divine Comedy is a catchy, a pretty catchy song. Apparently, at least according to Metal Archives, Peter Togren from Pain/Hypocrisy does vocals on the song. I can't say I really noticed that. But that's what the website says, and if it's on the internet, it must be true.
How could it not be? How could it be false?
If it's not true, somebody please let us know. But that's what the internet says. It literally says lead vocals on track 10. So
there you go. Yeah, but you're right. The bonus track, Bring the Thunder, it's just another song that's very different, and it has that more hard rock feel, less power metal. It's fine. I just think it lacks the hooks that the rest of the album does. So, if anything, I think it reinforces the fact that this band went in a different direction on this album, and it's paying dividends now because they're pretty big. They're getting a lot of positive press over the last decade, and they're still, touring and recording and whatnot, and the band has stayed intact, so God bless. Just not my favorite bonus track, and wasn't enough to make me want to go out and check out that first album if I'm being,
Yeah, it's fine. It kind of, I think, it kind of gives me more of like an 80s arena rock kind of vibe than anything else, which is not so much what the band I think was morphing into at this time and what they would go on. I feel like their future, like everything that's come out since Renatus has been kind of like a natural progression from that and not really a major departure from that sound, although you may argue that they haven't reached this level of quality since then. But I think stylistically the band is more or less pretty similar. I'm not counting this track as part of my rating, I'll just say, but it's an interesting counter. The old version of Dynasty sounded like right up against that current version at that time. The thing I was really super curious about was like where your rating would be after like 10 years, and is it as high as you thought it would be? Is it right where you thought it would be? Do you think you overrated it, or was like nostalgia kind of overrated it? Where are you kind of at with this?
If you would have asked me what I thought the album was, I would have said that it's not a 10, but it's probably a 9.5. I think that's a little generous. It's not that good, but it's good. And I was oscillating between an 8.75 and a 9, and I kept going back and forth on this one. I think I'm going to land at a 9, because even though I don't think it's perfect, it's really, really good. And in many ways, I think it is a trend-setting album, because this genre doesn't get much better than this. And if there's an album out there that's better at doing this, I would love to hear it if I haven't heard it already. So I'm gonna give it a 9. I think it holds up exceptionally well. I just think it's a little. I just don't know that it's as perfect as I thought it might have been back in the day. I'll throw the same question back at you before I hear your number.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat as you. Like, I think I probably would have said like it was a 9 or a 9.5. It's an 8.75 for me. It's still very, very good. I just don't. To me, it doesn't reach that 9. It's very close to it, but there's everything is just like very above average for me, but like never like out of this world. Maybe with the exception of the 2 songs that I had mentioned. So like I'm kind of right there with you. I think we're just quibbling at this point between scores, but yeah, I think,
very solid scores to say the least.
Yeah,
So
I think as a lot of times time kind of. When you let these albums sit for a while, like you build them up in your head, and then when you go back and listen to it, with hindsight being what it is, and hundreds and maybe even thousands of albums listened to since then, there's a lot more to compare to. And with the Frontiers label, there's so much of that kind of style of melodic metal that it doesn't feel as unique as I think it did 10 years ago when it kind of was. This album, and again, like I mentioned earlier, Eclipse's Bleed and Scream kind of, I think, really broke through the glut of power metal and prog metal stuff that we were listening to at the time, so it felt really fresh. Whereas I think now it's like there's 400 bands that are trying to make this sound, and I'd argue Dynazty and Eclipse are probably still 2 of the best ones that are doing it.
yeah, very well said, but certainly an album that holds up quite well to this day. I'm glad we covered it. I have to throw you a softball every now and again, because if I don't, how the hell are you going to do a deep dive on, some obscure black metal album or something like that? So be that as it may, good stuff, and probably a band we should go back to at some point. But let's talk some news, because there's quite a bit to talk about on this front. First and foremost, I'd be remiss not to mention the unfortunate passing of it's funny. Let me start by saying it this way. I had mentioned the band Firehouse on this podcast. I don't know, maybe about 6 months ago or 8 months ago or something like that. And I was saying how I wanted to cover one of their albums because I have some cool stories that go along with their debut, and just a lot of stuff related to the album that I thought was worth mentioning, to say nothing of the fact that I think it's a really good album. But it's with heavy heart that I have to report the passing of singer CJ Snare, who died at 64 years old earlier this week. If we didn't have something in the queue for next week, I probably would have called an audible and done the Firehouse album to commemorate his passing. But just really sad news. The guy had some set of pipes, and whenever you hear about the passing of someone, it makes you just stop and think. But yeah, 64 years old, the Firehouse singer CJ Snare. Rest in peace.
Bye-bye, baby, bye-bye. I say that not in jest, but in honor of a really underrated vocalist. And yeah, we've definitely talked about how we need to talk about this band, because like I know so few songs by this band, but the songs I do know, I really love. So them and Rat are 2 of that kind of 80s glam hair, whatever you want to call it, metal bands that I really always kind of gravitated towards for whatever reason, more so than the Motley Crues and the Poisons of the world. And so I'm hoping that, and I'm not hoping, I know that we will cover both bands at some point in time, just a matter of when. But
don't worry, we're going to cover Motley Crue as well. That's been on my list for quite some time. The only difficult thing for me is deciding which album to cover. So, more on that.
We could do girls, and dedicate it to our behavior in high school. So
yeah, it's pretty true there. I can't argue with that. On to some other a little bit lighter news. Leprous has announced their new album, Melodies of Atonement. It is coming out in August. It's their 8th studio album, and they've announced a full U.S. tour of shows along with the band Monuments, both of whom will be in Atlanta at Prague Power this year. The tour kicks off September 4th in Nashville. It ends October 5th in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. A nice run of shows for these bands, and an album that I'm most definitely looking forward to.
Nice, yeah. I've always really liked Leprous, even though you wouldn't think, or I wouldn't think it would be something that I like. It could just be, I think Einar Solberg is such an unbelievable vocalist, such a talented guy. I never listened to his new solo album for whatever reason, so I guess I'll have to go back and check that out. But I'm excited to see them at Prague Power. They're a really fabulous live band. I've seen them a bunch of times now over the years, but it's that album's coming out just in time for the set, so I'm guessing we'll be hearing some of their newer tunes at that time.
Entirely possible. It'll be interesting, to say the least. I wouldn't put them in the accessible prog category, but I do think it is interesting that you like them, and they definitely have a quality to them that I think makes them very unique from other bands that are doing prog nowadays. But speaking of prog metal bands, Dream Theater has announced their first set of shows for their 40th anniversary tour, kicking off October 20th at the O2 Arena in London, ending in Amsterdam on November 24th. The O2 Arena holds 20,000 people. They are not playing small rooms on this reunion tour. I am really curious if when they do their New York show, whether they try to go into Madison Square Garden. Is that possible? I mean, the place holds 18,000 people. Is it possible that they're just going to try to pull this off?
Are Dream Theater that much more popular in the UK than they are in their home country?
Their home city, for that matter.
I don't know what the metric is to determine that, but the question also, begs the question: how many tickets are they going to sell at the O2 Arena? How many tickets can they sell at Madison Square Garden? It's interesting. They've certainly, I think, reached a plane that most metal bands don't reach, with Grammy Awards and, just the amount of people attending their shows. For a prog metal band, it's kind of incredible. So yeah, it'll be interesting. I wish I could say I am excited to see them play. It's just the knowing that the vocals are going to be so subpar in a live setting just kind of makes it so not exciting for me.
I will be there. I can't wait. I just want to know what they're going to play. Are they going to play new stuff? Are they going to change the set list every night like they used to do with Portnoy? I'm really curious. I'm
really interested to see what Portnoy being back in the band, if it changes the dynamic of all that, what the new stuff sounds like, what the songs are chosen for the tour. It'll be really interesting. So yeah, we'll see. I mean, I'll probably depend if I see that the set list is really something that I like. I probably will still go in spite of.
That was going to be my question. If they played Raleigh, would you go to the show?
Yeah, I mean, I would have to check and see what the set list were looking like. We'll see. Let me see what they play at the O2 Arena, and I'll base my choice on that. Because
reality is, what they play that night could be completely different from what they do.
Yeah, but it'll give us an idea of where their heads at as far as what are they willing to dig into and how deep into the catalog they want to go.
What are the odds that they come out and play all the Astonishing? I mean, how ridiculous would that?
That would make that a very easy decision.
I agree with that. That's the only show I ever walked out
in the band when they made that album. He wasn't. Right?
That's why That's why it's even funnier. But I digress. One last bit of news: Charlotte Wessels, formerly of Delane, has announced her upcoming solo album due out on Napalm Records September 20th. She says she explores a heavier sound on this record. It's called, I guess, the first EP or the first single for this album, called The Exorcism, comes out in middle of May. Expectations for this one? Are you curious to hear it?
Very. My understanding is that the band is pretty much all the people that used to be in Delane before the band split. So I know, I believe Otto is with her. Timo Summers, I believe, is part of the band. So I really. Yeah, so it's pretty much it's pretty much just the ex-Delaners, and so listen, the new Delane really blew me away with both their live performance and their new album last year. So I think this is going to be an interesting, counterpoint to that. But, I've always been a big fan of Charlotte. So I'm very curious about this, and I'm really looking forward to hearing it, because she's been, I would say, fairly quiet since she's left the band. Like, I don't think she's released a couple of solo albums that I think have mostly been songs that were like she was recording for her Patreon members and kind of, I think, pieced it together into an album. This feels like more of a full band, not so much like a solo situation. So yeah, I'm really excited about this, and I think my expectations are pretty high. So we'll see. We'll see we'll see what happens. But I don't know, how bad could it be, right?
Well, famous last words. But that being said, that brings us to next week, where we've got something a little bit different and some surprises that will be attached to it. We had talked about this a couple of months ago when you had brought to my attention a song by the band Zornheim, which was a Swedish band that, quite frankly, I'd never heard of up until you had played me the song. But I was really kind of blown away by what you had sent me, and I was just pleasantly surprised that a band that could be that good, and I had just they were just not on my radar. But next week, we're going to cover their last release, the Zornheim Sleep Experiment. It came out just a couple of years ago. There is a lot to enjoy about this disc, and I really want to give it the time that it is otherwise deserved. And for our Patreon members, we got some surprises for you as well as it pertains to this album and some other stuff that's in the works. So I think that is something that you should stay tuned for. But next week, the Zornheim Sleep Experiment, brought to you by the Metal Exchange.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The band kind of came across my desk, so to speak, after we did our Symphony of Enchanted Lands episode by Rhapsody, and I believe it was Zorn himself reached out, and he said, hey, really enjoying your podcast. This album was actually a big inspiration for our band Zornheim, at least the symphonic part of it, because this is actually, there's a lot of black and death metal elements mixed in with the symphonic elements. And when I hear those genres, I'm a little hesitant because it's very hit or miss for me. But what I've heard so far from this is really up my alley. So I'm excited to really dig into this. The band also was kind enough to send over a lot of the all the written stuff that kind of goes along with where the story, where they came up with the story and everything, and it's based on a true thing. So we're gonna delve into all of that and kind of not just talk about the music, but talk about the themes and everything as well. So I think this is going to be a really interesting episode, and I'm really looking forward to digging into this one. So glad that I discovered, or not that I discovered them, but that I found out about them and shared them with you. And I believe they are working on something new. I don't know when it's supposed to come out.
We'll have to confirm that, I guess. But
yeah,
certainly, like I said, there's a lot of meat on the bone here, and I think that some cool stuff, especially for our Patreon folks, that we'll talk about next week when we sit down to record this thing and all that goes with it. So
we're staying in Sweden, is what you're saying.
We're not deviating from Sweden. I expect you to pick ABBA the following week, and we'll go from there. But yeah, good stuff. Appreciate all the support. And we look forward to joining you again next week.
Yeah, good stuff. Another fun album. This Dynazty was a great to go back to again. So awesome stuff, and yeah, this will be really interesting next week. Something that I just really don't know much about. So looking forward to it.